Hello everyone. Today is the 22nd of January 2018 and I'm going to talk about this myth that women know how to birth just because women have always done it. There are some myths that I'm debunking in these talks that when I first heard them, when I was first pregnant and gave birth in 1970, and I don't think they started me on this journey in childbirth at all, because that wasn't my interest. But just as a person who was pregnant and giving birth in 1970, and I would hear comments, or when I gave birth in 1982, I would think to myself, well, that makes no sense. And the reality is this is one of the myths that was not given in 1970, but when I gave birth in 1982 was being given. And I had already at that point spent a lot of time in third world countries. I'm not involved in birth in third world countries. I like to know how to make fires without matches, and how did we live before electricity, and how did we live before there was refrigeration, and what were traditional health systems. So those things were really important to me. But when I heard that women have always known how to give birth because they've always given birth, I would ask people in third world countries, do you believe that? And they'd laugh. Really, they would just laugh. They know that women do give birth, that men don't give birth. That's common sense. However, in every language, the verb give birth, that's such a weak verb. We don't really know what that is. And so and if you're going to have a cesarean, that's a weak birth. We know I am pregnant. There isn't actually a verb for pregnant. It's all a noun. But women in third world countries absolutely go by the belief about birth is there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. And to a lot of extent, all their health systems are trying to prepare them to have a safe birth. And if they are with people that they love, those people are trying to help them stay in control to some degree. So it's really important for you to understand that there are not traditional communities that believe that just because women give birth, therefore they know how to give birth. They know they do give birth, which is different than know how to give birth. And knowing how to give birth, when I gave birth, if I had heard this in 1970, I would have said, you are kidding me. I didn't feel I knew how to give birth. In fact, I felt that birth just happened to me. It was something that I had no control over. I couldn't time. I couldn't say, okay, I'm going to have a contraction now and I want it to last 30 seconds and it can be this painful or that painful and now it's going to be gone, and within 6 hours, I'm going to have had a series of contractions that I control, and then I'm going to push my baby out in my controlled fashion. I couldn't control the birth. A contraction would come. I didn't know when it was coming. This idea that you time a contraction and are told another one's coming. Sometimes that works, but then contractions get closer together when that stops working. You have somebody say, now the contraction's going to back off. Sometimes that works, but then they get longer and they get more intense. So when this message started to be given in the late 1970s, early 80s, it was also coupled with a change in the childbirth trend, which was to give women more choices. And really the choice-based trend that we are in today was predicated on the basis that women have always given birth and they know how to do it. So women know what kind of birth they want, and therefore women can choose what they want and don't want. And this was also based on the foundational belief that the medical profession is interrupting a woman's ability to birth instinctively the way that women know how to birth. And this was theoretically supported by some famous authors. One midwife said midwives should sit in the corner and knit, and that was based on a famous obstetrician who said women should be left alone to discover birth themselves. With this famous obstetrician who I met, and is a lovely man, and he has a wonderful reputation in the natural birth movement. He was also a trained surgical obstetrician, so when he started, if a woman didn't discover birth, then he could roll her down the hall and do surgery on her. Also, when people self-select, then and go to a person who's known for a certain approach to birth, then by and large, most of those people will achieve what that is. But we have the rest of the world, the rest of the population of women giving birth. And when Birthing Better started to develop in the 1970s, early 1970s, it was an open-armed approach to all birth. There were definitely women who helped develop these skills that felt that they had known how to birth. Their births had been great, and they were able to convey in this system what it was they did. So if a woman in birth said, I really focused on my breathing, you had to say, well, how did you breathe? What did focus on your breathing really mean? Can you explain that to your daughter or to your sister or to a stranger? If a woman said, I really focused on relaxing, what did that mean? You have to be able to articulate that to someone else. But that also gave us a clue as to why this is a myth. Any woman who says, I focused on my breathing, is telling you she is choosing skills. That doesn't mean she knows how to birth just because other women have birthed. It means that for her, she figured out that if she used that skill would be used for herself as a focus. And a focus is an important aspect of having a skill. A skill is something you do. So when I go into traditional communities and ask people, how do you do this or how do you do that? That particular overarching skill has a number of skill sets. We know that when we do any of the skills that we have. So let's talk about driving a car, because a lot of people do drive a car, or we could talk about riding a bicycle as well. You have to put your hands on the wheel of the car and know how to steer the car and keep it on the road. That's one skill set in driving a car. You need to know how to brake softly and not just slam your foot on the brake, and that's another skill set within driving a car. And steering and braking can be used at the same time, along with other skills. So when we talk about breathing in birth, that is one skill set. And that skill set can act as a focus, which means that when we're experiencing this birth and we choose to use our inhale and our exhale as a focus, that means we choose a skill. So we choose how to breathe in, we choose how to exhale. So those are skills, the inhale choice, the exhale choice. And we put those things together because by doing those two things consciously, we have a focus. We stay in control, we cope, we manage, we deal with, we work with, we stay on top of whatever sensations are occurring within us, or whatever sensations or experiences are coming from the outside. And so when women talk about the skills they've used in birth, that tells us that this is a myth, because a myth that women automatically know how to birth because women have always birthed then falls into the category of those people that believe that women are instinctively birthing, that somehow they are outside of their conscious human cortical brain and into this very primal, non-thinking reptilian brain that just gives them this instinct. However, instinctive behaviors, when they have been tested or researched, they are fright, flight, and fight. They are not instinctively know how to do something well and feel empowered by it. So the primal brain isn't a primal brain that goes, I am faced with an intense, infrequent experience that is around labor, hard work, and perhaps painful, and somehow instinct takes over, and I am having this oxytocin-driven, orgasmic, wonderful experience that I absolutely know at every single second of it, am certain that I am birthing in a beautiful manner. That isn't happening in our primal brain. That isn't happening in our cortical brain either. So by driving the conversation for the past 35 years, I've been involved in birth for 45 years, but the trend changed between 1970 when I gave birth and 1982 when I gave birth again. So when this trend started to talk about instinctive birth, and a little bit later talked about, and now people are talking about oxytocin and the fact that, women know how to do it. They should just be left alone and get the medical profession out of the way. So women should just say no to medical care, because there's another myth that says if you say yes to anything in medical care, there's going to be this cascade of interventions in which you're going to feel out of control. So the medical profession has not interfered with birth the way that people see it has. It has interfered with birth in some ways that we will talk about further in debunking the myths. However, taking medical care away from birth doesn't necessarily equate to women knowing how to birth and the outcome for her and the baby. These are different things. So a woman can cope beautifully in birth and still have problems that arise. Those problems may be not life or death, not usually are. So for instance, a woman could cope beautifully with labor, but when she gives birth, when she delivers the baby, she can tear severely, or she can have a retained placenta, she can bleed, or she can develop an infection. The baby can come out, it can come out with a bump on its head, a hematoma, maybe fine, but it looks weird. Or a baby could, in that second stage, because the cord was around its neck or around its body, be compromised in its breathing. So managing birth, instinctively getting through it, and necessarily not having problems are not connected. They're unrelated. So when we talk to each other about childbirth, we have to reassure each other and ourselves, we do not know how to birth. Simple as that. Just because you're pregnant, you're not going to know how to birth, which puts you directly into the Birthing Better camp, which is learn skills. Because at the end of the day, all of us are asking this question about our pregnancy and birth. Is birth an event that I can plan? I'm going to make a birth plan. I'm going to research the pros and cons of all sorts of things. I'm going to think about what I want and what I don't want. It's going to be sort of like a big planning, like my wedding or a trip or something. I'm going to plan every detail of it, or I'm going to plan just some details of it. It's an event. Therefore, if you've answered the question, it's an event, then you're planning for the event. Or you can answer that question, what's birth? By saying it's something that happens to you. You can't plan for it. You never know what your birth's going to be like. There's no sense in making any plan. However it unfolds, it's just going to unfold, and you're going for a ride. And that's pretty disempowered. So birth planning an event is empowering to people. Saying you never know what it's going to be like, that's kind of disempowering. On the other hand, it's sort of freeing. Well, whatever happens, happens. Okay, it's going to happen to me. So whatever, I'm just going to go along for the ride. So those two answers to the question about birth, women have always given birth. So therefore, it's either an event you can plan, it's something that happens to you, never know what it's going to be like. So the third, which is not even part of the societal consciousness at all, is that it's an activity that we have to do. You may not be able to plan it. You can plan some aspects of it. I plan to birth at home. I plan to birth in the hospital. I want my husband or my sister with me. You can plan some of those things. And it is going to happen to you no matter how much you plan, because you never know what it's going to be like. However, at the deepest part of giving birth, this weak phrase, giving, this weak verb, giving birth, or this weak verb, having a cesarean, it is an activity that takes place over time. And that time frame is pretty unknown, but it's really relatively short. Most women will give birth within the time frame of 24 hours. And most give birth in the time frame shorter than 24 hours. Certainly there are women who have niggling labors that go on longer than 24 hours, and there's always this pre-labory kind of contraction kind of stuff, that the Braxton Hicks, the tightenings get more intense and you're not certain if you're in labor. But even the medical profession that says labor is when contractions get longer, stronger, closer together, and that tends to occur once progressing labor starts, takes place between 3 hours and 12. When it starts getting past 12 hours, then there's been a period of time in that birth where there has been a pause. It hasn't progressed. So we know that this verb, giving birth, having a cesarean, is an activity we have to do over time. And Birthing Better is the skill set of the skills that you can use to do that activity, whether your plans unfold or not. And because you never know what your birth's going to be like. So as your birth unfolds, if you are skilled, then you are going to skillfully birth your baby, no matter where you birth, who's present, or what happens to or around you. So we have to pass on to women. It is a myth that you automatically know how to birth. And we have to pass on the answer to the question, is birth primarily an event you plan, something that happens to you that you can't plan, or is it an activity you're going to do? If we ask those three questions and point people in the direction, activity, activity, over time, you got to do it, then people will be more receptive to, let's have a good set of skills. And we hope, of course, you'll choose Birthing Better skills because they were developed by people who answered that question, the mothers and fathers. And because it's for all births, and that's really, really important. So how can you help our Trust Common Knowledge get these videos out there? They're going to be on YouTube and the Debunking the Myths Around Childbirth playlist. Like our Facebook page, share these videos elsewhere, comment on them so we can have a conversation. Facebook is going to be making changes, and we want to be part of those changes. We want Birthing Better, which has always been a community, to become a broader community, and we're using Facebook to broaden our community. Don't know. I'm going to talk tomorrow about another myth, and I will do a series on the truths about childbirth. That's really important, because if we're going to have a new conversation in childbirth, people need to have the language to discuss that conversation, because right now the language of childbirth is infused with myths, and that is causing this huge rise in shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, anger, frustration, confusion that so many women have been left with since this present trend of having choices and seeing birth as an event has become popular since the early 1980s. And this is what we're trying to change. So see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.